Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and well, this is the Moondrop Void. This is Moondrop's first ever headphone, or their third ever headphone, depending on how you're counting. So this headphone actually technically came out back in August, but very quickly they got some early community feedback, and Moondrop kind of did the right thing, and they took this thing off the market, went back to the drawing board and said that they were going to make some fixes to the Void. And what I have here is the newly revised version of the Moondrop Void that I've been spending some time listening to for the past few weeks and trying to figure out how does this thing stack up against other open back dynamic driver headphones at around its $200 price point. So that's exactly what I did, and that's what we're going to talk about here in this review. Like all my other reviews, this is a live stream. If you're here now live, how's it going? We'll have a conversation in a little bit, but I guess we're just going to get to the review. And before I do that, just a quick shout out to Shenzhen Audio for sending in the Void for review. If you want to check out the Void or anything else they got, I got a link to them in the description down below. But without further ado, let's jump back to the table and start talking about the physical stuff of the Moondrop Void, what you get inside the box. I'll give you a quick preview of the box itself. It is nice and classy. I dig this. I think that's actually some of Moondrop's best art, in my opinion. But let's not talk too much about the box. Instead, let's talk about what you get inside of it. Honestly, not a lot at $200, but I don't know. The headphone game doesn't nearly accessorize to the same degree that the IEM game does. So I guess we give them some leeway there. You do get a 3.5 millimeter to 6.3 millimeter adapter, which is nice because that means the stock cable ends in a 3.5 millimeter termination, which is what I personally like to see. Now, this cable, if you missed my review of the Moondrop Venus, this is actually the same stock cable that comes with the Venus, and I gotta be honest, I really, really like this cable. It's lightweight and it is cloth covered. I don't know if you can take a look at that. It is cloth covered, which I know sometimes like cloth covered cables can be kind of hit or miss, a little bit too stiff or not. This one, it's really just really quite nice behavior. You can see it's flopping, it's not stiff, it's not holding its shape or anything like that, and it rotary wraps quite well. Generally really pretty happy with this cable. And like the one on the Venus, this one terminates into dual 3.5 millimeter entry. So this goes into the headphone end. And that means that you can ostensibly replace this with a number of other aftermarket cables if you wanted to. But again, I really like this stock cable, so I don't know that I ever would. That said, Moondrop does also sell this aftermarket cable. They call it an upgrade cable that works with both the Venus and the Void. And similarly, it's got 3.5 millimeter connectors down here. On the other end, it is a 4.4 millimeter balance cable. And this is overall actually a pretty nice cable, but I like this cable better, personally. So, I don't know. That's two good cables, but the stock one is my preferred. Now, that's going to bring us into talking about the headphone itself, which is kind of where a lot of the critical feedback that Moondrop got came from. And I'll be honest, this headphone at $200 still feels cheaper than a $200 headphone, if I'm perfectly honest. The revised version that I've got here did not really change that at all. All right, what's the same here? What can I say about this? It is very lightweight plastic build, which are not necessarily bad things. What's interesting is that on the original Void that came out back in August, all of the plastic was kind of like surrounded in this soft touch material, where with the revised version, they've gone with a more traditional hard touch plastic. I don't know that that is either better or worse, but it does seem to be a little bit more flexible with the updated version. So I guess that's good. But I will say that it still feels pretty rickety in the hand. I don't know if you can hear this. Let's see, I'll go up to the microphone just to kind of give you a sense of what this thing feels like. It just feels like a very, very plastic headphone, which is, it's what it is. On the original version that came out, there was basically no dampening that was between the ear cup and the headband here. So when it would touch right there, there was a very loud and audible clack. They did, I'm thankful, they added little rubber stoppers, and it helps a little bit, but it does seem like the harder plastic they're using on here is a little bit more resonant than the plastic on the original version. So actually I've got the original version here on hand, so you can kind of see them head to head. They look identical, but you tell me which one clacks more, because I feel like they're about the same, all right? Here's the original clack, and then here's the new clack. It's a little bit more damp, but it's still fairly clacky, if I'm perfectly honest. All right, let's talk about the ear pads real quickly. They do also kind of feel a little bit on the cheap side. They are a vinyl ear pad, but they are nice and easily user replaceable. They have a pretty simple pop-in mechanism, which is nice to see. And they are also angled, which is interesting. So they're a little bit thicker on the back than they are on the front, which should ostensibly help a little bit with the fit. And I don't know, that's the build quality stuff. I gotta say, aesthetically, I actually kind of dig it. There are not a lot of white headphones out there. I hope the white plastic on this doesn't discolor or anything like that over time, but generally I'm pretty excited to see a color that, or a headphone that's not just a plain black headphone. It looks pretty good. And I also like that the drivers are clearly visible through the grill, especially even more so if I shine a light behind that, but my head doesn't glow, so that's basically what people will see. But yeah, generally pretty dig the aesthetic, pretty much dig the aesthetic. But I will say in terms of fit, let me throw this on my head, it doesn't, at least out of the box, it doesn't really fit my head that well. So let's punch in on this so I can kind of demonstrate exactly what I'm talking about. I think the headband basically is just overall a little bit too narrow left to right. And because of that, I get more pressure up here at the top of the ear pad and less down here. In fact, especially around here on the back, even though the drivers are angled, I really was not getting a very good seal out of the box. Now, what I did was I pretty aggressively bent the headband, which is not too hard to do. Basically, I bend it outward at about this point and then bend it inward at around this point. And what that has the effect of doing is kind of expanding the width of it and then also tucking the bottom of the ear pads in a little bit, so that now with this thing fully bent to my head shape, I actually get a decent seal. I wouldn't say it's a fantastic seal, but overall, like the clamp on this thing is not an aggressively clampy headphone. It's obviously very lightweight and plastic, and those things are good. It's just that the headband is unfortunately a little bit on the small side. Now what's interesting is that it's actually a little bit smaller than the headband on the original one. And now it's, you know, I'm talking like a matter of 1 to 2 millimeters. So, yeah, maybe not even worth mentioning, but it's definitely not one of the things that they fixed with this updated version of it. So those are my overall thoughts here on the physicality of the Moondrop Void. So let's start talking about the sound on this headphone. Like I typically do, we'll start by talking about the sound signature, and then we'll get into the technical performance, and then I'll bring in a couple of other competitors at this price range for direct comparisons. But let's start with the sound signature. And overall, I would say this is actually a surprisingly pretty warm headphone. This is definitely a bass emphasized headphone, and it's fairly thick in the mid-bass region. It's not just like a sub-bass shelf like you might expect on a Moondrop Variations or a Dusk or something like that. This is just a thick, bassy headphone. On the other end of that, they actually do have pretty decent treble extension. So you've got, you know, somewhat normal vocal tone, decent treble extension, and then on the bottom end of the tuning is just really quite thick bass. If you want to see what the frequency response of this looks like, I do have a frequency response linked in the description down below. It's on Squiglink, of course, but check that out. But for now, let's just start talking about what do I like about the sound here on the Void. And there are some things, okay? Generally, I would say that tonality, that sound signature that I just described is overall inoffensive, okay? Vocals, yes, they do sound pretty thick, but overall they sound tonally right. Like there's no weird nasaliness, there's no weird shrillness, or just any other awkwardness to the vocal tonality. I think that they did the upper mid-range quite right. And while I described that lower end as being really quite thick, I think that the upper treble extension here on the Void does help quite a bit to cut through the thickness of the sound and deliver actually a pretty decent sense of vocal texture, which is one of the things that's pretty important to me. The treble on the set also, while it extends well and it helps cut through the treble or cut through that bass thickness, It is still what I would say is overall an easy listening treble. It is not an aggressively sharp treble. I don't think anyone's going to have any issues with fatigue or discomfort or just unwanted surprises with the treble on the set. Just generally nice, laid back and easy. Just overall, that is kind of what the sound is on this. The Void is an overall easy to listen to headphone. It's relaxed and it's not going to surprise you in a bad way. So that's what I like about the sound here on the Void. But of course, I'm going to complain and nitpick about some things. So what do I not like about the sound here on the Void? Well, I'll start and just, you probably saw this coming. This is definitely bassier than my preference. I generally prefer, I don't want to say a lean sound. I like a fullness to my sound, but I like less bass emphasis than what you get here on the Void. But maybe more critically, let's say you love bass. It is interesting digging into the bass performance here because it is a bassy set, but I would say that surprisingly the bass is kind of weightless. There is, it's not like a smeary bass, but it also kind of lacks localization, right? So it just kind of sounds a little bit like it's everywhere and nowhere all at once. A little bit of a haze of bass. It's just overall kind of a weightless bass. It kind of sounds a little bit ethereal. Despite the fact it has a lot of bass, it really just does not sound like thick and bodyful. It still has this weird weightlessness to it. And generally, I would say also the bass is not especially articulate on this set. I would say that separation and layering on the Void are pretty decent. Like, they're fine. But you're not going to expect like an especially wide soundstage, and especially I think the imaging performance of the Void is not standout. So by that I just mean that, again, that separation and layering is pretty decent, but if you're looking for a three-dimensional, well-positioned representation of exactly what you're hearing, it's going to sound a little bit more blurred here on the Void. So those are my overall thoughts here on the Void, but like I typically do, we're going to compare it to a couple of other headphones directly. So while I do a little bit of magic here to clear the table, and we'll pull in a couple of headphones that I think you might be interested in cross-shopping against the Void. Let's see if I can fit these all on the table. This guy's a little bit on the chonky side. But the headphones that we've got here, all right? Get out of there. Well, we've got, of course, the Moondrop Void, $200 single dynamic driver, open back headphone. Here we've got the Sennheiser HD 560S, also a $200 open back dynamic driver headphone. Although I will say that the price on this is pretty regularly around $150. So take that into consideration. And then over here, we've actually kind of got a bit of an oldie, but I still think a goodie. This is the Philips Fidelio X2HR. Originally, this thing came out at like $300, so it's kind of not fair in this comparison, but it's still very much available, and you can still get it for like $150. Also an open back, also a dynamic driver headphone. So that's kind of the playing field. Oh my gosh, I wish these things fit into my screen a little bit better. But let's talk about how they compare in terms of sound signature. The Moondrop Void, like we just got done talking, it is a warm, bassy set. Decent treble extension. It's an easy listen, but it is fairly bassy. The HD 560S, on the other hand, is kind of the opposite. This is somewhat of a lean, neutral sound signature. It is a little bit bright up top and a little bit lean in sort of the lower mid-range, but it does also have pretty good bass extension, despite not being a bass emphasized set. Whereas here with the Fidelio X2HR, I would describe this as kind of a tasteful V-shaped sound signature. It does have some mid-bass emphasis to it for sure, and also a little bit more treble zing than you'll get on either of these sets. More in like kind of like the mid to upper treble zing. But overall, I would describe this as somewhat of a V-shape, again, a tasteful V-shape, where this is definitely the bassiest set of the bunch, and this is the leanest, most neutral of the bunch. So how do they compare in terms of tech? Oh, actually, let me rank these things in terms of my tonal balance preferences. I'm actually going to say that the 560S is pretty easily my favorite in terms of tonal balance, and that these two I would put about on par. They're very different flavors. Again, this is kind of the warmer, bassier, thicker sound. This is a little bit closer to neutral, but still kind of V-shaped sound signature. I think that they're about equal, and the 560S is pretty far ahead, at least in terms of the tonal balance. But let's now talk about the technical performance here on these sets. So the Moondrop Void, like I just got done talking about, I would say that where this thing is especially weak is in the bass. The bass is just a little bit bloomy and inarticulate. It's not thick and smeary and smudgy because the upper treble, again, does a really pretty good job of adding that sense of layering and definition and vocal texture. But the bass on the set is just, it's a bit much. The 560S, on the other hand, actually is pretty standout in terms of technical performance. It's got a good head stage, I'd say above average imaging quality, and even like nicer bass. Again, this is the least bassy, less bassy than the Void by far, but the bass quality on the 560S is, in my opinion, just quite a bit better. The one thing that I will call out on the technical performance of the 560S is that, well, I mean, I mentioned up in the tonal balance that this is a little bit bright up top. It can come across a little bit sharp in kind of the lower treble region and just be a little bit uncomfortable at times. So a fair warning on that. Whereas now let's talk about the Fidelio X2 HR. I would say that the bass performance on this set is somewhere in between the two in terms of quality, and also probably in terms of volume. I think it has like a tighter, more impactful punch than the bass does on the Void, but it doesn't extend and like give you that bass articulateness that you get on the 560S. It's decent bass. I think overall too, the Fidelio X2 HR does pretty well with in terms of head stage, sound stage, and imaging quality. I would say is pretty good, but a step behind that. So if I were ranking these purely in terms of their technical performance, I would say that the 560S is tops. The Fidelio X2 would probably be second place, and then third place in terms of technical performance is, I would say, the Void. Now, the final comparison points that I wanted to make on this is talking about the physical stuff, the form factor. So the Void, like we just got done talking about, it is the only white one here on the table, and I kind of like the way it looks. It's like there are not a lot of headphones that look like this, and I dig it. It's nice and simple, but it also does feel the cheapest on the table by far, despite the fact that it is, well, it's every bit as expensive as this used to be, and this is actually cheaper now. But that said, I don't know, there is still somewhat kind of a Porta-Pro style appeal about the set. Like, it just feels a little bit cheap and plasticky, but I like the aesthetic of it. So I don't know. I'm a little bit split on that, to be honest. It just doesn't feel like a $200 set. The 560S on the other side is also a lot of plastic. There are metal grills out here, which you also have in the Void, but this is overall a lot of plastic still. But I would say that this still feels a lot nicer. Like, it's just much less rickety, much more solid feeling. The only complaint I would say about the build quality here on the 560S is that you do have somewhat of sharp edges here around the headband where it splits. But frankly, that's pretty nitpicky because at this price range, I think the build quality and the comfort on the 560S are all pretty nice. But the Fidelio X2 HR, I've got to say, is by far the best build quality on this table, and somewhat that should be expected because the price of this set, again, used to be much higher than it is now. But they still sell this thing at $150, and you still get the build quality of this thing. So you get, you've got nice metal rings right here. You've got a very nice solid steel headband, you've got a leather wrapped headband here, and you've got a suspension strap, which I'm personally a big fan of. Honestly, my only quibble with the build on this set is that one, okay, I got two quibbles. One, it's a little bit on the big side. That's a small quibble. But two, these velour pads, and I don't know how well this is gonna come across with YouTube's live stream compression, but these velour pads are a little bit scratchy and also super, super lint magnety. So I don't know. It's a small thing that hangs me up. I think if I were ranking these in terms of build quality, I would say that the Fidelio X2 HR is by far the best of the bunch, and the Sennheiser is probably next, and then the Void is down here in terms of quality. Now, the aesthetics and what I like about this kind of bring it up a little bit closer for me with the 560S, but if you're just talking purely on build quality, I think you do still got to give it to the 560S. So those are my thoughts here on the Moondrop Void, but as always, I got to give it a score. So out of 5 stars, the Moondrop Void, I'm going to give a solid 3 stars. You probably saw that coming. overall, this is just not a very Moondroppy headphone in a lot of ways, but it does still kind of appeal to me in the way like a Porta Pro appeals. Like it's got somewhat of a lo-fi build. The sound quality, I don't want to say it's lo-fi, but it's a little bit lo-fi in terms of the sound quality, but you know, it doesn't have the tonal balance that we expect of Moondrop. It doesn't have the build quality, frankly, that we expect of Moondrop. And I think at $200, it doesn't have that aggressive competitiveness that we expect of Moondrop. So it's kind of not very Moondroppy. But if you are a Moondrop stan, and I probably am, it does still have an appeal. If you're interested in checking out the Moondrop Void, of course, I've got a link in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't already, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and I'll catch you on the next super review, unless you're here live, in which case, hang around for this small interlude, and we'll have a chat.